Now, I screamed at her to wait, but she didn't even look back. She just kept on running in her bare feet, with that half a handcuff still dangling from one of her wrists. And then she was gone. My yelling attracted the attention of the guy who just pulled in to pump gas, and for a second, I thought that he might have been the guy the girl was running from. But when I told him everything was under control and the cops were on the way, he nodded quietly and returned to his vehicle. Since the girl was sure that she was being followed, I'd parked my car facing the whole gas station, not near a pump. But since the girl decided to run off and take her chances elsewhere, I figured that I'd do what I went there to do in the first place and actually fill up my tank. And so I got back into my car and drove around to the pumps and was opposite the guy that I'd talked to about calling the cops. Now at this point I'm just kind of reflecting on everything, but we swapped a little small talk about the girl and I explained how I'd picked her up on the highway, scared out of her mind. And he agreed it seemed like something really bad was going on. And then he wished me luck with the cops before he paid for his gas and drove off. But no sooner had he pulled out when another car came rolling into the station. It was a 4-door sedan, a pretty nice one too, and it pulled up to the pump just behind me. 3 men then got out, all real regular-looking guys, probably in their 40s or 50s, and then instead of pumping gas or walking over to the store to buy snacks, they started looking around the area like they were searching for something, or maybe someone. I'm keeping one eye on my gas pump and one eye on the guys that just pulled up, and then suddenly, the oldest of the 3 says, "Hey, you haven't seen a little lady walking around here, would you?" Now, I've always been a really bad liar, and I knew a straight no probably wouldn't pass with this guy, so when the older guy asked me if I'd seen her, I said yes. But then, instead of telling them the whole truth, I told them a version of it. I said that I'd seen a crazy-looking broad in the middle of the highway who'd tried to get me to stop. But since I was pretty sure she was about to try and carjack me, I kept my door locked and drove around her and sped off. I knew not to look him dead in the eyes, so I looked around him and his buddies and then asked, "Why? What's this about? She escaped from like a insane asylum or something?" And the 3 of them just sort of laughed, and I figured that I might have, sold them on my performance. But then as the older guy stayed in front of me, his 2 buddies started flanking me on either side, with one looking at my car and the other looking off in the direction that the girl actually ran. The older guy then suddenly asked me, "Did you call 911?" And again, in what was a version of the truth, I told him I had. I didn't mention anything about arranging to meet the cops at that gas station. I just said that I called them because I was worried some crazy B-word was going to end up splattered on the highway, and some poor schmuck like me was going to end up going to jail over it. I'm not saying it was an Oscar-winning performance, but I tapped into some genuine emotion there. Yet no matter how convincing I thought I was, the guy's 2 friends weren't moved in the slightest, and one of them was now looking through my car windows, clearly looking for any sign of that girl. I think those were some of the scariest, most nerve-wracking moments of my entire life, praying that girl hadn't left anything behind on the passenger seat when she'd bolted, something like a scrunchie or maybe some of her clothing. I also got terrified that I'd left my phone on the dash and that the guy might see a blood smear or something on that from that girl, and so you can imagine my relief when I felt the weight of it in my pocket. I was at that point I decided to be a little aggressive. And I don't mean that in a sort of I tried to fight them way. It was almost like a normal person would want to know why their car was being inspected, and that's what I asked. I turned to the guy looking into my car, and was kind of rude and standoffish when I said something like, "Hey, what are you looking for, buddy?" And he looked at me, and started backing off away from the car with nothing but a smile. The older guy then said something to the effect of, "Don't mind my friend there, he's just a curious soul." Something really creepy like that, and then they made their excuses and moved on. As I went to pay for my gas, the 3 men were still walking around the gas station. They were doing it less urgently than when they'd first arrived, more subtly too, but they were still looking for that girl. I walked up and down in that store after paying for my gas, making out like I was just an indecisive snacker, and then a few minutes after, the three guys got back into that sedan and left. I then made myself some coffee, ate a few protein bars while I told the clerk that whole story, and then walked outside to meet the cops when they showed up maybe 20 minutes after I'd hoped they would. I repeated the story, included the part about the three guys showing up, and with added emphasis on how damned unnerving this all had been, like they had the girl fitted with a tracking device or something. And that sounded like a little too sci-fi for me at first, but the more I thought about that afterwards, the more it shifted into the realm of possibility. I know I was on a lonely stretch of highway, and at this point it was almost 11 p.m., but the fact those guys seemed to know exactly where to stop, which car she'd been in, and which direction she'd run off in, it makes me think that that might have just been the case. Even the cop that I spoke to agreed that if it was some kind of kidnapping situation, the girl could have been fitted with some kind of tracking device, most probably in the handcuffs that she was still wearing when she got into my car. And before he left, one of the cops thanked me for calling it in and added that even though it had been a stressful and potentially traumatic situation, getting the police involved was the right thing to do and meant that we were one step closer to bringing everyone involved to justice. And the guys chasing the girl had potentially made a huge mistake in getting their faces and license plate on the gas station's cameras. And if it was me that had led them there, I should feel proud of myself. It was pretty cool for him to say that and definitely made me feel a little bit better about this whole thing, but it was also just about the only thing that really did. Because all my other thoughts about it were dark and more dark, and they played out on the rest of the ride home too, which was a whole 3 hours of wondering what the hell had I almost gotten myself into. I got a call from a detective a couple of days later, and after retelling that story to him with as much detail as I could remember, I asked if the girl had been found. And according to him, they hadn't found anybody but the owner of the vehicle the men had traveled in, and that basically they were still trying to figure out what the hell was going on. The detective said if he needed to ask me anything else, he'd give me a call, but that was the last I heard from him, or any Pennsylvanian cop for that matter. And I still think about that girl every now and then. I wonder who she was, but a part of me thinks that in the same way she wouldn't just give in, the same way she'd patiently engineered her own escape, those men chasing her won't give in so easily either, especially when she still has a voice to tell the truth about what happened to her. Some days, when I'm in a brighter mood, I like to think she got away, and that she's raising kids with a good man someplace with all that darkness being just a memory for her. But then other days, when I'm not feeling so swell, I get this bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I feel like I know they got to her, and that they shut her up for good.